two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt, the host today. We often talk about DSA on this program, so at last we'll address the question, what is DSA? I'm a longtime member, and I'm here today with David Foote, recently the chair, now the secretary of Ithaca DSA's chapter. David Foote, what brought you to DSA and the left?
Well, thank you, Theresa. I wanted to just give a little bit of my biography here at the top of the show, not because I think that I'm so special, but really because I think I'm not. I've come to learn that through asking other people this question in the local chapter, my story is one that's fairly common for people of my generation who have found themselves involved politically in some way. But many of us don't really know what to do about the incredible dissatisfaction that we feel with the way that our economy is run, the way that our country is structured. So in the interest of outlining my own path from disaffected millennial to political activist, here's the nutshell. I was raised in a very conservative Christian household in Western Pennsylvania, deep in the Rust Belt, small town America. So at the start of the Iraq War in 2003, I was 18 years old. I had no real theoretical political underpinnings. What I'd been told all my life was reality for me. The shift started to happen when I was just gaining an understanding of why some people were opposing this war, when someone that I knew, a friend of the family, died in the conflict. It was really tragic. It affected a lot of us and sort of instilled this sort of anger and sense of betrayal in that had been affected by the government that I'd been taught to trust. And that never really went away. I moved to Maryland shortly after high school, and I had the opportunity to start actually going to anti-war protests, as well as just other rallies against the way that the Bush administration was handling the country. There were always people at each of these handing out socialist literature, little newsletters and handouts, things like that. And I started to make a habit of bringing these home each time. I will admit there may have been some kind of ironic detachment. It was just kind of cool to have communist literature. But, you know, it started to sink in a little bit. And another switch flipped when I had moved to New York State. Obama was elected and the wars continued. These horrible conditions internationally that had motivated me to develop an interest in politics started to grow underneath the Democratic president. Add to that the financial crash in 2008, where no one with any level of responsibility was punished in any way. Then Occupy Wall Street a few years later that taught me that people can organize democratically. Black Lives Matter, which started as a movement and a hashtag in 2013, which really laid bare the deep and abiding racist structures of our country. And while I was absorbing all of these, every couple of years there was a brutal bombardment of Gaza, financed by the United States. Throughout all of this, I was just at home reading about it, being frustrated, feeling alienated. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I had to do something. Then, like a lot of people, in 2016, I started to see this name, the Democratic Socialists of America, pop up. Perusing the national organization's website, there really wasn't a single thing that I disagreed with. DSA was saying that a better world is possible. It was a message I really needed to hear. So I started going to meetings here in Ithaca. About a year later, I was able to step into a position as an officer with the chapter. As you mentioned, I was chair for 2 years, and I'm now secretary. So I take notes and I am in charge of communications with members.
So what is DSA and how does the organization operate?
Mhm. Well, there's a lot of history here. DSA as an organization was founded in 1982 when two organizations, the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, or DSOC, and the New American Movement merged. There were about 6,500 members at the time. And I understand, Theresa, that you were one of them. Can you talk about this from a first-person perspective for us?
Yes, I was. Now, there isn't a great deal that I can tell you about the process of the merger, or what I understand was a lot of hard work and sometimes traumatic conflict that went into it, because I was a very new member at that time. I had joined, I think, in early 1981 here in Ithaca, where I was already living. And I was involved only really in the local, as we called it, that is to say the chapter, and had next to nothing to do with the national organization, except kind of receiving Democratic Left, as it was already called, you might say the newsletter, and going to meetings and hearing about things, but not really knowing anything on the inside. But I heard that there was a merger with, I was a member of DSOC, did I say? That was the only group that was in Ithaca. There was no New American Movement here, to the best of my knowledge. I heard that there was a merger was going on with an organization that I knew nothing about. And I remember giving a comrade a ride to the bus terminal so that he could catch a bus to then get to some ride that would take him to the founding convention. So I had that little role. But other than that, it was really just something I heard about at a distance.
Okay.
Some years later, I became involved with the national organization and began to hear more. And I think actually there was a bit of, there was a great hope at the beginning, right after the merger. And then I think a slow downturn and worsening of the finances, the membership fell off a little bit.
Sure.
And then came the great change.
Yeah.
Which actually started, I mean, some people say, and then Bernie came and then there was a great change. That's not the whole story. There was you might say, a slow picking up of, let's say, organizational responsibility from the inside that started in the early part of this millennium, went on, picked up, gained speed after about 2010. And we were already growing slowly when we reached that 2015 and started urging Bernie to run. And
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings us close to today, and I'll rewind a little bit again and kind of give that the surface level thing, because that's what I took notes for. But today, DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, has almost 95,000 dues-paying members nationwide. That's, of course, a smallish number in a country that has 300 million people. But the thing to keep in mind is this isn't a political party, it's an organization. So each member has chosen to join, to pay dues, and has joined what has become the largest socialist organization in the United States in 100 years. Everyone who joins the national organization, which you can do by going to dsausa.org, then belongs to whatever chapter is local to them. This could be based in a city like Ithaca, on a campus if you are a university student. There may be a Young Democratic Socialists of America chapter operating at your school, or in more rural areas, your chapter may cover your entire state. The huge amount of memberships, the huge amount of growth, as you said, it had started, but it happened very quickly over a period of the last 5 years, in part because for many people and for me, the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign highlighted what it meant to be a democratic socialist and the real need to confront the inequality that is really baked into our economy that affects all of our lives. And of course, at the same time, the Trump presidency hit a lot of us hard. We learned that we couldn't just treat politics as something for elected people to worry about. So DSA has grown by tens of thousands of people every year since 2016, and more continue to join, in equal parts inspired by the possibilities of making grassroots political change and the really horrible worsening reality around us. Because it's an organization that's committed to democracy, all decision-making is shared between DSA members, with the local structure relying completely on the time and the effort of the people who step forward to volunteer as officers, as the heads of committees or working groups, as people who are volunteering to do tabling or canvassing. It's completely member-driven. And we'll talk about what exactly that looks like here locally in a few minutes. For the structure of the national organization, there's a convention that goes on every 2 years, made up of delegates that are elected from chapters all over the country. And these delegates vote on what major strategic directions DSA should follow, what programs should be priorities. Some of these priorities, as voted on in 2019, included pushing for Medicare for all, a public health system, the establishment of a Democratic Socialist Labor Commission, which has happened and has been carrying out some really good work during the pandemic to help workers organize, and the Green New Deal, which we believe should be a people-focused, sustainable grassroots program that benefits everyone, not some corporate greenwashed program. I think over the past year or so, the Green New Deal has taken shape in certain ways in certain areas, but we really believe in it being a radical change to the status quo. And of course, we're always interested in working on elections. These conventions, one of which is happening as we record this, also elect the National Political Committee, or NPC for short. The NPC puts the convention's priorities into practice, takes into account budgetary realities, and makes strategic decisions when we see the political context changing, as it often does. But between the local chapters and this National Political Committee, there's actually a lot of connective tissue. There are national working groups that are focused on police and prison abolition, mutual aid, international issues, socialist feminist issues, Afro-socialism, and more. There's also caucuses that have formed that bring members together around specific visions or strategies, which help coordinate across chapters and across regions in order to reach socialist goals. There's also a tech committee, a design committee, and other smaller groups that just make sure the structures of the organization are benefiting the local chapters, that resources and materials are shared in order to make all of our work better. And of course, DSA does have a handful of full-time staff members, the national director, field organizers who help us facilitate communication. There are staffers coordinating the finances, member databases, all the nitty-gritty, the publications like Democratic Left that you mentioned. So yeah, while we're organizing locally, we're also really connected to broader struggles. I know just in recent weeks and months, some of our local members have participated in DSA New York planning calls with the staff field organizer, have met with Housing Justice Commission organizers to make sure we have ways of fighting for affordable housing, groups focused on budget justice, immigrant justice. Our own Socialist Night School series was in part inspired by communicating with other groups that had run Socialist Night Schools, and on and on. So one of the challenges, but one of the reasons that I chose to join DSA, as you can tell, it's kind of a broad tent organization. It treats all political issues as connected and recognizes that if we're fighting for justice in one area, we're essentially fighting for justice in everything. It's very welcoming and affirming to be part of something like this. At a certain point, though, you kind of have to look at the whole of political struggle and say, well, where do we start? What can we do in our communities and how?
So indeed, coming down to our own community, tell us a little about the Ithaca chapter and what specifically goes on here in Ithaca.
Yes, so I'm going to talk over the various committees and working groups that we have active, but I wanted to preface it beforehand. We are a very small chapter in a very small city. And while DSA chapters in New York or Boston or San Francisco have really robust structures, a full calendar of regular meetings with hundreds of people attending, that's really not quite the case here in Ithaca. Our high water mark would probably be 30 to 35 people involved, but there have been times outside of electoral cycles, during times of demobilization after kind of big defeats of leftist policy, when it's honestly just been 6 to 8 of us getting together to talk about our plans. That's just the reality for Ithaca. But the way that I see it is this is actually a big opportunity for anyone who's looking to get involved or to reconnect if you haven't been involved for a little while. And it's an opportunity in 2 ways. First, we are very accessible for new members, for people who are looking to learn how to organize, how to lead, and gain valuable experience building grassroots political programs. You could come to a meeting this week and sign up to lead a phone banking effort in support of local or state legislation. You could step into a role volunteering just with an email for a local political candidate or organizing 2 to 5 other people. Just coordinating. It's very easy to communicate locally. I've seen that most people who come to our meetings, maybe they have just joined or they haven't joined, but they're curious. They want to sit in for a meeting or 2 and figure it out. Just kind of get a sense of the temperature. Unfortunately, sometimes I think meetings end up being a little bit dense and impenetrable when we're talking about city agencies or the minutia of legislative sessions. But here's the thing, even after years of working at this, we're all kind of still trying to figure it out. There are a bunch of targets that are always moving, and it takes a lot of time to strategize and plan campaigns. I think it was Oscar Wilde said, the big problem with socialism is it takes too many nights and weekends. But in spite of all of this, I want to reiterate, there's a place for anyone who wants to get involved in Ithaca DSA. There are really no barriers to entry. The second thing I'll be a little bit more brief with. Again, this is a small city, and while one voice can't change the plans of Governor Cuomo or Senator Schumer, we can speak face-to-face with our local representatives. We don't always succeed in swaying them, but we've had success working one-on-one with city council people, with county legislators. We can build power here in Ithaca in a way that a place with a much bigger population might actually struggle with. We can be really visible.
So what more specifically are we working on here in Ithaca?
Sure, so now I kind of am going to get into running down our working groups and our committees and the specific work that they're doing. One of our longest running projects is the fight for housing justice. This is an issue that hasn't necessarily been picked up by other local nonprofits, so we have been plugging away at it for actually quite a long time. Ithaca has seen intense gentrification due to some factors that are difficult to grasp and to grapple with, others that are much easier to put a finger on what the problem is. For example, there are 2 apartment complexes that were recently constructed downtown, Herald Square and City Center. Both are luxury apartment complexes that are running something like $3,000 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. That drives up the market rate of apartments in Ithaca, and it drives people out of downtown. The thing that we've objected to the most, though, is that both of these projects receive millions of dollars of tax abatements. So out-of-town developers are making a profit off of the residents of Ithaca while also receiving just truckloads of public money. At every public hearing related to both of these and others, we've spoken out against these tax abatements. Our representatives unfortunately acted against the people, acted against our wishes, but we're working on changing this trend. In the meantime, we've also stood with the tenants union to oppose evictions. We've fought to opt into the Emergency Tenants Protection Act. We make radio shows kind of like this one that highlight the need for quality public housing and more. So if this sounds like something that you would like to get involved in organizing around and fighting for, the opportunity is there. And of course, that goes with the rest of the projects too. So I'll go into those without making this pitch each time. Secondly, about this time last year, DSA members were central to pulling together a local anti-racist coalition. This includes activists that are working on police and prison abolition, immigrant and refugee rights, rapid response to racist incidents here in Ithaca, as well as compiling community resources that will promote real public safety. This group was formed to promote alternatives to policing, which, as we know, targets Black and brown communities with violence and lifelong harm. This group meets every other week. Third, our political education program has grown out of a longstanding monthly reading group that was organized by DSA members years ago. Starting last year, when the reading group couldn't really get together anymore, we started to organize a specific program called Socialist Night School. And that has had 8 sessions now that have focused on specific topics like socialist feminism, indigenous sovereignty, anti-fascism, solidarity with Palestine, and more. These have been open to anyone through Zoom, focused on participation and a really rich discussion. And in some cases, we had more than 60 people attending, which was really exciting. There's also been a smaller March reading group that's running, and we're planning for another Socialist Night School series this fall. There's also an EcoSocialist Working Group, which is more recent, but has drawn a lot of interest and is, I think, a great place to start. This is our own eco-socialists have become part of a statewide coalition to promote public ownership of utilities. They work to try to pass the Climate and Community Investment Act, the New York State Build Public Renewables Act, and I've talked about forming a NYSEG, that's New York State Energy Group, Ratepayers Union, to organize people against unjust utility costs. So the eco-socialists have caught up really quick and are building a lot of energy locally.
So that's a lot already, but is there more?
There are, yes. Thank you for asking. About 4 more, I think, that I have to mention. I'd be remiss to not bring up our electoral work, which, depending on the year, can become really prominent and become like the focus of our chapter's work. Of course, we supported Bernie through canvassing, tabling, and phone banking in 2016 and 2020. And members have been, this year, very involved with city council and county legislature campaigns. So we actually have several members who we expect to win their elections this November. And we look forward to working with them while they're in office for sure. The elections haven't happened yet though, so it's not completely guaranteed. If people want to get involved with making sure that works, you can email Ithaca NYDSA and we'll connect you with those campaigns. We also have a labor working group that has been meeting on an as needed basis, less often this year, but we stand at the ready to support worker organizing, strikes, unionization efforts, or other ways that people are struggling against the capitalists, against unjust workplace conditions. If you're listening to this and you have questions about how to organize your workplace or how to address grievances collectively, we can help connect you with experienced organizers and really give you the tools to take power where you work. We have a couple of local folks who have been involved with the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, or EWOC. So we could really pretty quickly get you involved with the ability to make a change in your workplace. The last one that I'll mention is just focused on chapter communications. If you are a DSA member and you'd like to help with our social media, write copy for our weekly newsletter, contribute to video and radio programs, write press releases, take photographs, design posters, all of these things are a big need, but something that our organizers often have trouble making time for. So definitely reach out if this is something you'd like to help with. So that is the full list of our active committee and working groups, but there are other things that we're always supporting through partnerships with other local organizations. Medicare for All is again a priority, and we're good friends with some of the folks in the Campaign for New York Health. We work with the Tompkins County Immigrant Rights Coalition to promote protections for immigrants and refugees. We work with the Ithaca Tenants Union to promote tenant organizing here in Ithaca, where really vulnerable populations have been made more so by the pandemic. There's so much to be done, but as the popular chant says, the people united will never be defeated. Everyone who is interested, everyone who has spare time, has a place in this permanent ideological revolution that Marx outlined that we want to see. There are 95,000 members of DSA nationwide, as I mentioned, but we can build a movement of millions. And really, we can change the world. It takes time and it takes work, but the potential is there. And we just want to give people the power that they have when they work together.
Thank you, David Foote. So I'll just repeat a couple of the things that you mentioned. You can get in touch with the chapter at Ithaca NY DSA, that's all in one, Ithaca NY DSA at gmail.com. Or if you want to learn more, you can look up the national website, dsausa.org. That's dsausa.org, or the local website, ithacadsa.org. That's ithacadsa.org. And by the way, we do this program regularly, and many earlier episodes are online at ithacadsa.blogspot.com. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 3.